Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's story is so insane that even Hollywood's best screenwriters couldn't dream it up. Picture this: American soldiers draped in the so-called world's police gear, standing proud in Iraq or Afghanistan, convinced their equipment is 100% pure American made. They're feeling all warm and fuzzy about us industrial might until they find out the backbone of their battlefield swagger didn't come from some heartland factory. Nope, it came from China 10,000 miles away. On the surface, this looks like a scandal about a pair of gloves, but peel it back, and you've got a masterclass in profit chasing, legal loopholes, and the shadowy puppet strings of global supply chains. Today, we're ripping into the US military's so-called CWF combat gloves, layer by layer, to expose the stinking web of lies and greed. We're going to follow the money, follow the fraud, and show you how this Pacific-spanning supply chain turned the legendary Berry Amendment, the law that was supposed to protect American military procurement, into nothing more than wet tissue paper, thin, useless, and ready to tear at the slightest pressure. And here's the real kicker that ought to make every American taxpayer furious: China's manufacturing machine didn't just sneak into our supply chain. It quietly, brilliantly, and completely filled the gaps for the most powerful military on Earth. And the Pentagon bigwigs, they had absolutely no clue. In fact, they were so impressed with the gear that they actually praised it. You can't make this stuff up. Let's dive in. Part 1, Afghanistan's deep freeze kicks off a glove revolution. Rewind to 2001. The US storms into Afghanistan like a hurricane, crushing the Taliban in weeks, but our troops quickly ran into a deadlier enemy than any militant fighter: the Afghan winter. We're talking minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit in those godforsaken mountains. Now, the standard issue cold weather gloves the military gave our soldiers: a total joke, complete garbage. These things were so thick and so clumsy that wearing them turned your fingers into useless bear paws. You couldn't feel a thing, our Apache and Black Hawk pilots. They couldn't flip a single switch in the cockpit without fumbling around. One wrong move, one miss button, and you've got a multi-million-dollar aircraft wrecked and a crew dead. Ground troops, forget about sliding a tactical tablet or pulling up GPS coordinates. With those mitts on, your fingers don't respond. And in combat, a half-second delay means the difference between breathing and a body bag. But the real nightmare: those gloves were packed with nylon and polyester, synthetic materials that melt like cheap plastic when exposed to heat. One IED blast, one firefight with flames, and that crap turns into molten glue, fusing to your skin like hot caramel and causing third-degree burns that can kill you. So our soldiers were forced to make an impossible choice: freeze to death in the cold or burn alive if something goes wrong. Absurd doesn't even cover it. This was a national disgrace. To fix this disaster, the Army's Natick Soldier Systems Center, the guys responsible for outfitting our troops, teamed up with Masley Corporation, a tactical glove maker based in Delaware. Their mission: build the next generation CWF combat glove. The specs were brutal. It had to be lightweight, super flexible, cold resistant, and most critically, flameproof, windproof, and waterproof. A dream kit for any American grunt on the front line. After years of research and development, endless prototypes in field testing, the CWF finally passed inspection in 2007. The Defense Logistics Agency, the Pentagon's purchasing arm, signed off on a massive contract. Big numbers, serious money. By law, this entire order was supposed to be 100% us made. Why? Because we have the Berry Amendment, a law that's been on the books since 1941. It says in black and white that all military textiles, uniforms, gloves, boots, tents, even some food items must be produced entirely on American soil with American materials and American labor. Cost be damned. The original logic made sense. During a war, you don't want to rely on foreign suppliers who might cut you off. You want your own factories humming. That might have worked in the Cold War. But in the age of globalization, that law turned into a straitjacket, and we're the ones paying the price. Part 2, a profit-driven heist. Slapping made in USA on Chinese goods. So Masley Corporation had the prime contract, but reality hit them like a freight train, producing these gloves in the United States. Are you kidding me? Labor costs are through the roof, and domestic raw materials are astronomical. Each pair cost nearly $180 just to make. And what was the Pentagon paying after all the overhead? The profit margin was thinner than paper. They were basically doing charity work for the military. So what do you do when the math doesn't work? You subcontract, You push the work down the chain to someone who can do it cheaper. And that's exactly what happened. Maisley licensed the CWF design, the full specs, patterns, even the logo to Dakota Outerwear Group, a company that had been a long-time supplier to the Defense Logistics Agency. Decent reputation in the industry, but Dakota ran the numbers and realized the same brutal truth, even they couldn't make a profit-keeping production in the United States. So greed kicked in because that's what American capitalism does when you corner it. They looked across the Pacific, and the answer was obvious. China, the cheapest manufacturing hub on the planet. Enter the ringmaster, an Iranian-American middleman named Kohanbash. This guy's entire business model was sniffing out arbitrage opportunities in regulatory gray zones. Dakota's operations manager called him up, crying about cost pressure, saying they couldn't survive. And Kohanbash's eyes lit up like a slot machine. He realized immediately, move the entire production line to China, and the cost per G-love would crater to pocket change. The profit spread would be bigger than selling narcotics. So the conspiracy was born and meticulously crafted. International fraud operation that would run for over a decade. This guy had balls of steel. I'll give him that. He grabbed the full CWF engineering blueprints, all the detailed military specifications, and even physical samples, and flew straight to Dongguan and Wenzhou, China's manufacturing heartlands. He walked into local factories posing as an authorized US military contractor, flashing papers, sounding official. He told the factory owners, "We need tens of thousands of gloves built to the strictest US military standards." There's just one catch. You can't get the original American materials from DuPont or Gore because they're restricted from export to China. So find your own local equivalents that match the performance specs. And here's where Chinese engineering stepped up and proved they're no joke, while they couldn't get the proprietary fabrics from American suppliers. Because those are locked down tight by export controls, their chemists and textile engineers went to work, they tested, tweaked, and innovated. And guess what? They found domestic alternatives that matched or even exceeded the originals in windproof, waterproof, and flame-resistant performance. Let that sink in for a second because this is a punch to the gut for anyone who still thinks China only makes cheap plastic toys. Their materials science and manufacturing know-how are world-class. And they proved it right under our noses. So on Chinese assembly lines, thousands upon thousands of CWF gloves rolled out. Each one fully compliant with every single US military specification. According to the later investigation, the production cost per Pascal ER in China, a paltry $21.89. That's $22. You can barely buy a decent steak dinner for that in New York. The factory price, what the middleman paid to get them out the door, was $35. Good margin, sure, but that was pocket change compared to the blood money coming later. Those gloves were packed into massive shipping containers and sent across the Pacific all the way to a nondescript warehouse in New Jersey. And that's where the fraud's crown jewel happened, right here in America, on our own soil. Kohanbash hired a bunch of temporary workers, paid them cash, and had them carefully rip off every single made in China tag and any other identifying mark from each glove. Then they stitched on shiny, brand new made in USA labels. And I'm telling you, the workmanship was so clean that even seasoned military inspectors couldn't spot the difference with the naked eye. But that wasn't enough. They also cooked up a full suite of counterfeit documents, fake production records from phantom US factories, phony invoices for American-made material, and forged lab test reports from so-called independent testing facilities, all stamped and signed to Pentagon specifications. Every piece of paper looked legitimate. The whole laundering operation added less than $1 per G-love to the cost. Pure, unadulterated robbery. A glove that cost $22 to make was now dressed up like it was born in the heartland of America through Maisley and Dakota's regular government channels. These reborn gloves were submitted to the Defense Logistics Agency, and they passed with flying colors. The gloves were then issued to some of the most elite units in the entire U.S. military, the 101st Airborne Division, the 82nd Airborne Division, aviation unit stationed in Alaska, troops based across Europe, and forward deployed forces all over the world, from 2007 all the way to 2018. 11 full years. More than 59,000 pairs of these counterfeit gloves were worn by American service members in combat zones and training grounds. The total contract value, $11,726,000. That's over 360 million new Taiwan dollars. Enough to build multiple schools, buy a fleet of ambulances. fund veteran care, or put a serious dent in our national debt. Instead, it went straight into the pockets of fraudsters. Part 3, exposed, and the irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Here's the part that makes me want to laugh and cry at the same time. This entire illegal supply chain stayed hidden for over a decade, not because the fraud was too sophisticated, but because the Chinese gloves were too damn good. Seriously, for more than 5 years, the American soldiers using these knockoffs gave them rave reviews. Overwhelmingly positive feedback. They said the gloves were light, warm, and comfortable. They could operate touchscreens and tactical tablets without any problems. They could flip switches and handle weapons with precision. And most critically, the flame-resistant performance held up in real combat without a single major failure. No melting, no injuries linked to the gloves. So here's the picture. American troops are surviving firefights in freezing temperatures thanks to gloves made in Chinese factories, and they have absolutely no idea. They're high-fiving each other, giving credit to American manufacturing, thinking us industry came through for them. Meanwhile, the real MVP is a plant in Dongguan. If that's not the definition of irony, I don't know what is. And get this, the whole scam didn't unravel because some soldier's glove melted or fell apart. No, it got busted during a routine inventory audit in 2018. The Defense Logistics Agency and the Inspector General's office were doing a standard financial and quality check on stockpiled gloves. And one sharp-eyed inspector noticed something off. The chemical molecular structure of the waterproof membrane and flame retardant fabric didn't match the DuPont and Gore products specified in the contract. The composition was different. So they asked Dakota Outerwear for purchase records, proof that they actually bought those materials from the original American suppliers, and Dakota started stuttering. They couldn't produce a single legitimate invoice. The more the auditors dug, the bigger the hole got, and eventually the whole decade-long Pacific-spanning conspiracy collapsed like a house of cards. It was a stunning, embarrassing, and completely avoidable debacle. The numbers in the final audit report were absolutely obscene. $21.89 to manufacture each glove in China, $35 factory price. And what did the Pentagon end up paying? A jaw-dropping $198.75. Per Pascal IR, nearly 200 bucks. Let's do some real math here. On total procurement of $11,726,000, almost $9.6 million, over 81% of the entire budget was pure, unadulterated graft. That money didn't go to materials, it didn't go to labor, it didn't go to quality control. It went straight into the pockets of Maisley, Dakota, and the middleman Kohanbash. Out of every $200 the Pentagon shelled out, less than 30 bucks actually paid for the product itself. The rest was skimmed off by layers of middlemen and corrupt contractors. This tiny little glove ripped the mask off the military-industrial complex like nothing I've ever seen, exposing bloated pricing, back-scratching, political favors, and outright theft. Our tax dollars. Folks, that's our money. And here's the final insult to injury. The audit report confirmed in black and white that the Chinese-made gloves met 100% of US military standards. Every performance test passed, every safety requirement satisfied. So while we're busy patting ourselves on the back for American quality, the Chinese factories were quietly outperforming our expectations. China's manufacturing is no longer about cheap plastic toys and dollar store trinkets. It's a precision engineering powerhouse that can match or surpass top-tier Western military materials. Their cost control is obsessive. Their production flexibility is legendary. Their quality stability is borderline obsessive-compulsive. They solved a frontline crisis for our troops without even knowing it, and they did it better than our own domestic suppliers could have. Meanwhile, our politicians keep talking about decoupling and bringing manufacturing back home. But actions speak louder than speeches, and Chinese factories voted with their production lines by keeping our soldiers equipped, one counterfeit glove at a time. Part 4. The tip of the iceberg. America's defense procurement cancer runs deep. Now let's be absolutely clear about something. The CWF case is not some isolated incident. It's not a one-off screw-up by a few bad apples. This is the visible sliver of a massive iceberg, and the rest of it is lurking beneath the surface, threatening to sink the whole ship. Investigators later found that the same middleman, Kohanbash, had pulled the same trick with other military gear. He smuggled in so-called camouflage suits that were supposed to reflect night vision optics, but didn't. He brought in flame-resistant hoods that failed basic safety tests. He was running a whole catalog of counterfeit military equipment, all using the exact same playbook, And he wasn't alone. Years earlier, Wilco, a well-known American military boot manufacturer, got caught in a similar scandal. They imported boot parts from China, did minimal final assembly in the United States, and slapped a Made in USA label on them until those boots started falling apart in Afghanistan. Soldiers watched the soles peel off after just a few days of patrol. The military was humiliated in front of the entire world. These aren't just greedy individuals. They're symptoms of a systemic disease that has infected the very core of U.S. defense procurement. Let's break down the structural cancers, because this is where it gets ugly. First, the Berry Amendment demands 100% domestic production. But the reality is that American textile and apparel manufacturing has been gutted over the past 40 years. Globalization killed it, jobs moved overseas, factories closed, and the entire industrial base evaporated. Today, if you try to make textiles in the US, the labor costs are sky high. The supply chain is broken, and you simply cannot compete, so the law requires something that no longer exists. You can't obey it and stay in business. So contractors are forced to choose, go bankrupt with integrity, or cheat and survive. Guess which one they pick. The bureaucracy at the Defense Logistics Agency is a bloated, underfunded mess. Procurement officers and field inspectors are responsible for dozens of different contracts. Simultaneously, each worth hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of dollars. They're overworked, understaffed, and most of them don't have the technical expertise to tell genuine materials from fakes. That creates a perfect hunting ground for fraudsters like Kohanbash. Evidence later emerged that he paid off low-level inspectors with a few $1,000s, literally pocket change, to sign off on fake samples while ignoring the actual shipments. He didn't even need to bribe senior officials. The system was so broken that the lower tiers were wide open. Third, the entire contracting system is driven by profit and nothing else. Prime contractors, subcontractors, middlemen. They all exist to maximize shareholder returns, not national security. When obeying the law means losing money and cheating means hundredfold profits, and the risk of getting caught is low. Well, the math is obvious. This isn't about morality. This is about a system that incentivizes bad behavior at every single level. You can't fix that by firing a few people. You have to rebuild the whole machine. But here's the really uncomfortable part, and I want you to pay close attention, because this is where the conversation shifts from scandal to existential threat. Even if we eliminated every single instance of fraud tomorrow, the United States defense industry is still deeply dependent on global supply chains, especially Chinese ones. I'm not speculating here. The Pentagon itself has admitted it in multiple reports. Despite all the political rhetoric about decoupling, a significant chunk of our primary defense contractors still have direct or indirect ties to Chinese-owned companies. And the most shocking statistic, nearly 78% of the critical minerals required for us weapons systems, rare earth elements like neodymium, gallium, germanium, and others, are refined and supplied almost exclusively by China. What does that mean in plain English? It means Beijing could essentially choke off American weapons production with a single export control order. No F-35s, no missile guidance chips, no advanced radar systems, nothing. These Pentagon reports have said, bluntly and without sugarcoating, that America's defense industrial base cannot sustain a prolonged, large-scale conventional war against China. Let that sink in. The United States treats China as its #1 strategic rival. We posture, we sanction, we send warships through the South China Sea. But when it comes to the nuts and bolts of military production, we are dangerously, even embarrassingly reliant on the very country we're supposedly preparing to fight. That's not just irony, that's national security malpractice. And it's happening under our noses while politicians grandstand about Made in America. Part 5, conclusion. A pair of gloves shows America's bloat versus China's muscle. When you step back and look at this whole CWF saga, it reads like a modern version of the Emperor's new clothes. On the outside, the Pentagon is spending billions of taxpayer dollars on shiny Made in USA gear, supposedly to protect national pride and keep our troops safe. But when you peel back that label, that convenient, fraudulent label, what do you find? A transnational profit machine that's hollowing out America's defense walls while Chinese factories quietly hold them up. A pair of gloves that cost under $22 to make sells for nearly $200 to the US military. That's a mirror reflecting the military-industrial complex's addiction to greed. It's contempt for the law, and the pathetic reality of America's gutted manufacturing base. It also shows the world, whether we like it or not, the new face of Chinese manufacturing. It's not cheap labor anymore. It's elite engineering, precision production, and capabilities that meet or exceed the most demanding standards on the planet. Chinese plants aren't just filling Walmart shelves, they're quietly, competently patching up the supply chain for the world's most powerful military. They're the invisible quartermasters we never asked for and never admitted we needed. And that ought to scare the hell out of every American citizen. This dark comedy is far from over until the United States solves its domestic manufacturing collapse, until we rebuild the industrial base, invest in domestic supply chains, and make it profitable again to produce critical goods at home. We will remain vulnerable until we clean up the lobbying corruption racket that turns defense contracts into cash cows for connected insiders. The Berry Amendment will remain a punchline. It will always be a piece of paper that can be pierced by anyone with a needle and a roll of counterfeit labels. So here's the question that should keep every Pentagon decision maker awake at night. How many more made in USA wonders are actually made in China? How many more times are we going to pay top dollar for goods that cost a fraction overseas while lining the pockets of middlemen who couldn't care less about our troops? How long before the next audit uncovers another decade-long fraud? And what will it cost us in lives and money? We cannot keep ignoring this. We cannot keep pretending that patriotism equals domestic production when the reality is global interdependence. Whether we like it or not, this isn't about bashing China or praising it. This is about waking up to the truth of where we actually stand. And right now, we're standing on a foundation of sand, propped up by factories we don't control from a country we consider an adversary. That's not strength, that's a house of cards, waiting for the next gust of wind. That's it for today's deep dive. If you like this, no BS uncovering of the truth. If you want to see more stories that dig beneath the headlines and expose what's really going on, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video so more Americans can see the real story behind the labels. Because the truth matters, and we're going to keep telling it. I'll see you in the next one.